That's a gift and blessing, I guess, God gave me. As I've told you before, as a woman in the ministry 40 years ago, a lot of people didn't want me there as a minister. And nobody knew I was a lesbian at the time, so that wasn't an issue. But an old man told me on the way out one day from my church, he came out of curiosity from a neighboring church to see what a woman preaching was like, because there had never been one in this particular district in upstate New York. And he said, I don't agree with a thing that you said today, Reverend Bellinger, but I could hear every word of it. So I want to make sure people hear every word that I've got to say, because now at 67 and seeing the end of times for me, a few years off, I've got to say my piece about how we have got to get this world together before I leave. So I will be loud and out about it. I am so thrilled about today's panel, and I have thought about it for a long time. We've been discussing it in our reconciling committee. And, we always have subgroups within groups that we forget about. And all of us know in this church, because we've been committed to being loving and friendly and open and treating people equally, including all of those from the LGBTQ community. We all know that we are those kind of people, but we don't think about some of the people that even within our community that get lost. And those people frequently are foster kids who are part of the LGBTQ community. There couldn't be a tougher road for that. I'm going to keep my remarks short, and then this is how I thought we would go. Sheer Avery will be speaking right after my little short presentation and tell us her story, which is really remarkable. She was a foster child in the system, and before that had some pretty traumatic experiences at home and experiences in the foster care system that probably weren't great either. So she really is the show. And then once you have finished telling us your story, I'm going to have this dear friend of mine, a former law student and now fabulous attorney supervising attorneys who represent these kids, Phyllis Strickland, who is a woman of spirituality and faith, and I take some responsibility for getting you hooked into representing kids. You do? Yes. She took my children in the law class at Laverne, and she was headed in another direction, and she was a psychiatric nurse, and this was a second career for her. And I think something was tugging on her heart, and I said, Phyllis, you're really needed in this system. There couldn't be anybody better than a psychiatric nurse. Okay, one thing I did learn, even though I didn't have to use it very long, my homiletic skills, is that you'll forget every fact and so forth that I might tell you today, but you'll remember a story. So, 25 years ago this month, 1993, Martha Bellinger is sitting down as a jurist in the children's court in Monterey Park. And I had a calendar in those days of 40 or 50 cases a day. Well, I had one come on my calendar, and before I called it, one of the attorneys said, Your Honor, may we have an in-chambers conference, just the attorneys and you? And I said, sure. We have something sensitive we need to talk to you about. So I said, come on in, tell me what's going on. Well, the woman attorney and all the parents get represented in a dependency system. That's where the court decides whether or not to remove kids from their parents or put them in foster care. And the attorney for the mother, or father, didn't know it, but she was also a lesbian. County council was gay. Another attorney in the proceedings was also a lesbian. The only person who wasn't a lesbian was one of the attorneys representing the kids. But the father didn't know any of this. Anyway, I just think it was kind of funny. But anyway, the it was all set up against him, and he didn't know. I try not to be like that. I try to be open-minded and fair. Anyway, and I think I was during this. But here's the story. Mom and Dad were married back in New York City. Father was a jockey, rode horses. And they had 2 sons. They split up, and it was decided that Mom would remain on the East Coast with the 2 sons, and Dad would come out here. I don't know if he was, at that time, maybe doing the track at Arcadia or whatever. There's lots of places I know in California. So anyway, after about 2 or 3 years, he gets a call from his wife, Father. And she says, these boys are teenagers now. I just can't do anything with them at all. They're just out of control. And I think it's time that they should be with their dad. So he doesn't say anything more. In the meantime, when Dad had come out here, he got affiliated with an evangelical Hispanic church in Pomona, very homophobic, because what he learns when his boys arrive is that both of them are gay. Mom didn't bother to tell him that aspect of it. So he starts beating them, beat the gay out of them, which is encouraged, believe it or not, by people who like to call themselves Christians, some people. And so they ended up in the foster care system. And fortunately, even back then, we're lucky to be in California, and yes, I am one of those people who wouldn't mind seceding. We are a different country, a different nation, but even in 1993, we had lesbians on the bench. At that time, I was only one of 2 out lesbians in the Superior Court in Los Angeles. But at any rate, the attorney said to me, Your Honor, I just want to let you know that Dad is extremely upset about this whole thing. They had found 2 foster homes, one for one boy and one for the other, with gay foster men parents. And they wanted to become guardians, the 2 male couples. And of course, Dad just thought, oh my God, this is the devil's handiwork. It's bad enough that they're gay, but now, they're being encouraged even more by the very system itself. So his attorney told me, he's liable to raise a fuss in the courtroom. And I have no idea. I'm kind of fearful of what he will say. And I said to Paula, don't worry about it, Paula. I said, I don't think there's anything I can hear him say that I haven't heard myself against gay and lesbian people. And don't worry about it. We'll handle it. So I go out there, and the funny part of it all is that it comes time for him to speak his piece, and he does pretty much say just what I told you. Your Honor, this whole situation is just outrageous. My boys are sinful. They're committing sin, and they should not be in these gay foster homes. And I want them back with me. And my hearing that day was to decide whether or not to grant guardianships to the 2 male couples or to return them to Dad. Well, I'm not going to return them to someone who's beating them and has beaten them and doesn't accept them, even if he stopped beating them. Obviously, his outlook on who they should be and what they should be is inappropriate. So towards the end of his rage, he said, Your Honor, he said, there must be some kind of medication you can order to help them out. And I looked right at Dad and tried not to laugh. And I said, Dad, in my experience, medication doesn't help. So that was 25 years ago. So we've had children in the system for a long time. And I am so happy to have Sheer hear this and be with us here today. And she's going to tell you now her story, which is pretty amazing. And then we will have Phyllis speak about representing children, LGBTQ children in the system. If we have time for questions in here, we'll take them. But if we don't, we'll adjourn to have our meal. And they've arranged to have a microphone in the narthex with our tables, and so people can do questions. At this time, I introduce to you who I know is going to be just an eye-opening speaker for you. She has a reputation of being a profound speaker, and she wants to be governor of California sometime, so... It's never too early to start building your base, so take it away, Sheer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is truly an honor. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for welcoming me into your home. Thank you, Phyllis, for connecting me with Judge Bellinger, and thank you both for your commitment to LGBTQ young people in foster care and ensuring their well-being. Sure. And now I'm thinking, where do I begin? Because the facts that you shared, the story that you shared, is so accurate to the lived experiences of LGBTQ foster youth. I'll begin as a young child. I was raised in separate homes. My parents had separated while I was a baby, and I lived predominantly with my father for the most part of my young childhood. My father was and still is a devout Christian. However, he, along with my grandmother and my father's side of the family, were not accepting. Acceptance were not values in the household that I was raised in. I was placed in conversion therapy from the ages of 5 and 10. So I sat with a therapist weekly for 5 years of my childhood. And I met with a therapist each week who told me that who I was invalid, that how I was expressing myself, the ways in which my young self was attempting to express themselves, attempting to grow, attempting to learn, attempting to be embraced, and be given the opportunity to live my life authentically. That was stripped from me at a very young age as a child. And thankfully here in the state of California, conversion therapy has now been outlawed. But it did not come too soon enough. I endured conversion therapy, and there are so many young children across this nation who still endure this harmful therapy. And we see in the times that we're living in now, the anti-LGBTQ, the anti-trans legislation bills that are being passed and presented in House Congresses across this nation, especially with the administration that we're currently under, that our country is currently being represented by. So from there, I endured bullying and harassment in 13 public schools. So while I endured conversion therapy for 5 years, I also experienced bullying and harassment in 13 public schools. 13. From kindergarten through sophomore year in high school. In sophomore year, I attended a journalism and communications magnet high school. I had been in the foster care system for, I would say, for 4 to 5 years at that point. I was in and out of the foster care system for about 6 to 7 years. So at this point, I was in the system for about 4 years. Prior to that, I had witnessed my mother overdose as a result of familial instability. I witnessed my mother overdose in front of me after she promised that she wouldn't harm herself the day before. And that's how that was my pathway into the system. No one reported the abuse that I was enduring at home for the years prior to that. I was afraid of speaking up because my father beat me repetitively with a variety of thick leather belts, and I still have scars on my back today, resulting from those beatings often that took place while I was bathing in the bathtub, or I remember there was this one instance where I put nail polish on at school. Some of my peers had brought nail polish to school and were doing their nails, and I wanted to do my nails too. And when I got home, I was met with a beating. And the day I actually went into foster care, it resulted after I had put nail polish back on my fingers. I remember this was after my mother had overdosed. I was brought back by the Department of Children and Family Services. I was put back into my father's household despite my attempts not to be, despite communicating that I had left home. I left home for about a period of 4 months. I went back with my mother, and she overdosed 4 months after. So I was put back with my dad, and I came home from school one day, and I had nail polish on, and my grandmother was taking care of me. She was watching me. This was a period in time where tensions were extremely high between my father and I. My stepmother had decided to take their newborn baby and leave because she wasn't accepting of me either. She was a devout Catholic. She still is. And so she took the baby, and so my grandmother was primarily taking care of me at this point. And when I came home, she had just lost it. She was just like, your father can't even take care of you. I'm not going to take care of you. And I was placed into the foster care system. I was a burden to my family. And I was placed into a system that lacks resources, desperately lacks resources that are needed to support, whether those resources is funding for extending programs and services for young people. The foster care system is just completely under-resourced. So I went into the foster care system from there, and it's interesting because you have these amazing people, if you're lucky enough to find them, if you're lucky enough to be given an attorney who is well aware, who is well versed, who has received adequate training, who knows how to communicate, who truly cares, who will take the time to listen to your needs and to your wants, your goals, your desires. You're a child with your entire life ahead of you. Though that's what we need. That's the type of support young people need. And I was fortunate enough to have an attorney quite like Phyllis. His name is Mr. Joe Barrell, who represented me for the entire time that I was in and out of the foster care system. And I advocated for myself so profoundly, so profusely. And it's important to remember that if young people don't speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves in these type of systems, they're left behind. LGBTQ young people are already marginalized enough, put them in the foster care system with thousands of other young people trying to receive support and resources and services, and it's just a setup for failure. So I had to advocate for myself. When I was placed in my first group home, I was placed in a middle school for a week, and I, at this point, had began expressing interest in home study, independent study. I just could not, just going to school every day was just so tolling and so taxing on my mental health, on my emotional well-being. I was constantly in fear of my safety, and I was beginning to lose the aspiration to learn. So I had asked to be placed in an independent study program, and of course I was told no, and I was shipped in a van with all of the other young people at this group home to the middle school that they enroll young people into, and a week later I was defending myself against somebody physically attacking me, a student physically attacking me. And following that, I had been suspended. I had been threatened to be expelled. There were meetings with the district at that point. So I was on the table for expulsion, ultimately. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And I went to my attorney and I said, I need to be in an independent study program. And I did research. I looked up information. I researched programs and institutes and organizations, and I came upon opportunities for learning. They had a center at the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and I asked, and we had a special court hearing regarding the matters pertaining to my education, and the judge ordered that from that point forward, I would be enrolled in opportunities for learning at the school, at the location that I had specifically researched, that I had brought to her. I remember I was so proud. I walked into the courtroom with a packet. I had printed resources and information from the website. I downloaded the credentials of the teacher that was at the Learning Center. I provided phone numbers and contact information. I highlighted. I wrote a letter. I was like, this is so important for me. And I had the support of my attorney to be able to deliver those resources to her. And that was granted. And so, I mean, can you imagine the looks on the faces of the staff at the group home when I came back from court with a court order in my hand that said, I have now got to be enrolled in a learning program that is suitable for my needs, that will allow me to avail from the benefits of education, that will allow me to excel, that will allow me to focus on learning rather than on being worried about somebody physically assaulting me, somebody attacking my character, somebody slander, excuse me, thank you. That was a moment for me where it was so grounding. It was so grounding, and I knew that from that point forward, I would have to keep up with it. I would have to continue advocating for myself because it wasn't easy. The road getting there wasn't easy, and it wasn't easy after. So following that, I experienced retaliation at the group home that I was placed in. I had been, for months, my therapist had been trying to coerce me into taking medication for depression, for anxiety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I had witnessed my mother overdose from taking too many pills, and my therapist knew this, and I had communicated this, that I didn't even like taking Tylenol after seeing my mother overdose. I was so traumatized. I thought she was going to die in my arms and at the hospital. So I didn't even like taking Tylenol. And I eventually caved in. I eventually said yes because I was tired of not being listened to. And come to find out a few months later, after I had been released to go back home with my mom for the first time, which was a long period of time, I had found out that they were giving me a higher dose than what I had agreed to after they had asked me to increase my dosage after 2 weeks on the medication. I had said no, and then I found out that they significantly increased my dosage. And I found this out because they don't allow you to administer the medication yourself. So you're given the medication from a nurse. So I wasn't aware the pill looked the same to me, but so I was drugged, essentially, by the group home that I was placed in to oversee my well-being, to ensure that I was properly housed, that I was given the proper care that I needed. I was negligently cared for and given medication that I didn't consent to being given or didn't consent to taking. And I went, so I went home after that, and I went back and forth. I went home to a mom who was just freshly recovering from addiction and without resources. This was a mom who I thought was going to die in front of me, and then years later we're just thrown back together again. So unfortunately, still to this day, our relationship hasn't seen the best of their days yet. And that's something that I'm truly saddened by, but I also still believe that my mother is still struggling from addiction today. So I went back and forth from her home into the foster care system, back to her home, into the foster care system, back to her home, into the foster care system, about 6 to 7 times. And I just didn't feel like I was given the support. Each time I felt like I was having to constantly speak up and fight back, and I felt like I was being not heard, not listened to, but also retaliated against. And at the age of 16, after experiencing all of this so many times, I experienced homelessness. And I experienced homelessness from the age of 16 until recently, until I would say about June through September of last year, when my partner and I were finally able to get everything together and move into our first home. So I experienced homelessness for quite a bit of time. He experienced homelessness himself. But I didn't want to go through that anymore. I didn't want to go into a system where I didn't feel cared for, where I felt failed by, where I just felt like I wasn't going to excel. I felt like I had been placed back in school again, essentially. I lived in 2 queer collective homes, and one in South LA, one in Boyle Heights, before I moved to New York. At the age of 18, shortly after turning 18, I accepted internship opportunities in New York with nonprofit organizations that would advance my leadership development and that would expand my engagement in advocacy nationally. And I experienced homelessness in New York City as well, but I was excited to rediscover myself and to heal in new ways. I had spent an entire childhood of what felt like hell, of living in hell, and I was so eager and excited to go. And I think that speaks to the excitement of young people, the mistakes that young people make that are undoubtedly learning experiences. But I think that if I would not have left, if I did not make the decision to to live independently, to not go back into foster care. That was a choice that I made. That was a choice I made. I think that if I did not have done that, I would have still been subject to the trauma of going back and forth, of trying to mend a relationship with my mom, or be put back into a home, because the foster care system is focused on placing children, so putting them back into a home or finding a home for them. I made that decision myself, and if I hadn't, I feel like I would have been even more harmed. So young people, even in systems that are supposed to be meant to support them, to uplift them, failed me and failed so many young people, and I made the decision not to stay in it, and to move forward. And I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I'll wrap up with just saying a few words on how I began about school. In my sophomore year of high school, I experienced the most tenacious bullying and harassment that I had experienced, resulting in my inability to continue attending school publicly, in fear of my safety, in fear of my well-being. I still suffer from a back injury, from a chronic back injury that flares up every now and again, from the physical abuse that I endured by students. I recall walking through the hallway and being pushed side to side, almost as if the students were playing monkey in the middle, and pulling my hair. I remember I had hair not quite like this. It wasn't as long as it is now, but I would come home and my mom would have to cut the tangles out with scissors, and it would get so bad that we just had to cut it off. We just had to cut my hair off, and my hair had become such a prime part of my identity as a trans person. To be perceived as a feminine being, I had come home with like spit in my hair from students spitting in my hair from the back when I was in class, to pulling my hair in the hallways. All of this, the students were suspended. There wasn't a district process. There wasn't some sort of accountability process with the school. So I wasn't able to attend school safely anymore after that, especially with the principal suggesting that I go out of my way to take, the principal suggested that I take routes through the school that weren't monitored by security personnel, to avoid being in high populated areas where students usually commenced and hung out. So I lost my aspiration to learn after that. And I think it's important that we remember that all of the experiences that young people go through are intersectional, from foster care to homelessness to education. I didn't have a stable home, a stable family, a stable childhood upbringing. I wasn't raised to believe that my identity was valid. I wasn't raised to believe that my presence was worthwhile, that I had potential, that I was a child of God. I wasn't raised to believe those things. And then I endured bullying and harassment in school, homelessness. All of these things are intersectional, and we think to ourselves, why so many young people are so hurt, or so harmed, or so held back. And we think about all of the opportunities. There aren't enough opportunities, especially for young people of non-traditional experiences. And my experience, and every child in foster care, their experiences are non-traditional. It's just non-traditional, and we have to fight for ourselves. But with the support of people like you two are just so wonderful and amazing. And I'll end on this note. this has been the first time that I've stepped back into a church since I was 10 years old. So it's so enlightening and so empowering and so enriching to be welcomed and embraced by your love. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll give you a minute to catch your breath to follow up on that story, Phyllis. I just wanted to bring your attention to the handout that I gave you, and Sheer has pointed out, particularly points 8, 9, and 10. Going with 8, many of these LGBTQ youths live in an intersection of multiple identities and thus experience multiple forms of discrimination based on race, class, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Experiences of bias and discrimination from interaction with social workers and group home staff, as well as policy and structural barriers preventing LGBTQ youth from receiving the services they need. Point 8, a survey of these youth in out-of-home care in New York City found 78% of LGBTQ were removed or ran away from their foster placements because of hostility toward their sexual orientation or gender identity. And these statistics are just amazing to me. 100% of LGBTQ youth in group homes were verbally harassed, and 70% of them reported physical violence in the group homes. On any given night, think about this tonight when you go to bed, and pray to God to help us find a way to end this. There are nearly 2 million youth experiencing homelessness. Up to 40% of them identify as LGBTQ. And there are less than 20,000 youth-specific shelter beds in the entire country. So that is just amazingly sad statistics. And if ever there was another cause, and a more important cause, I don't know what it could be, to be a resistor and to stand up and say, this cannot continue, it certainly is these children in foster care. And now to my dear friend Phyllis, of whom I am so proud. She's a wonderful lady, good attorney. Phyllis?
Thank you, and good morning, church. A lot of thoughts. I'll try to be coherent in my speaking. When I took a class, Children and the Law, at University of Laverne, I graduated in '97, and my goal was to go into risk management because I had worked in hospitals. I'm a nurse. That's what I know. That's where I'm going. So to do something with medical malpractice or risk management in a hospital. But I was a little bit derailed because I had a professor that a professor that swore me in as an attorney when I graduated, and she made a statement about that so many lawyers practice law and they don't like what they're doing, and they end up hating the law and hating their job and probably being hateful people, and that I should consider doing, at least for a year, something where it made a difference and something that I loved. And so I did that. I said, for 1 year, I'm going to work in children's court and represent children. But I didn't know that that's where God wanted me. That's where God led me to. And I've been there since 1998. And even though I've been doing this work since then, I cry when I hear Sheer's story. I'm not happy about where we're at. We're not doing enough. and there's not enough lawyers like the lawyer you described, and the lawyer I think I was, and I'm going to read another story about someone else. There's not enough of us, because we work in a very broken system. If you heard Sher's story, it's broken. You know, we have we have laws in the state to protect children and their well-being. And so when a parent cannot parent or a guardian cannot properly parent a child, that child should be removed. Services should be in place that allow that family to heal and to go back, if appropriate. So that's the goal, that's the law of the state. But unfortunately, we take them out of a broken home and put them into a broken system. Why is the system broken? Because you have people, first of all, you have a government that right now does not value children and people and their experiences. We value money, and I don't want to preach, I'm sorry. But those same people then promulgate laws and practices that don't help. So for example, even though the foster care system is set up to have foster homes that can take these children while the parent is, while there's reunification, if there's gonna be reunification, you would think these would be the best places ever. They should be the best places and best people. But those very foster homes and group homes are broken too, because we have people in those systems that are broken. So you think about the foster home, you think about the judges. You have judges that understand this, and you have some judges in dependency court who don't want to be there. This is hard work, hearing these type of stories all day, 50 cases, oh my goodness. And you've got to understand the law, and the law is constantly changing. And so you have judges that A, may or may not want to be there, or B, they can't handle this type of work and that type of volume. And then you have lawyers, and some lawyers want to do this work, and some, they just phone it in, so to speak. You know, I've been doing this a couple years, I must be good at it. You know, I need to get out at 4:30, I'm out of here. And so, but that's not what is required of lawyers in this type of practice. We've got to really try to step into the shoes of the clients that we represent. I've got to intimately know their story and what they want. I've got to figure out what law is available for me to get them what they want. I've got to figure out how to develop a relationship with these children, even the newborns. If I were that newborn born to that drug mom, what would I want? What would it really take for this mother to be healed, to get the services that she needs? It's not good enough to take them from one place and put them in another place without trying to fix either of those systems. So that's one of my challenges. I actually would think I'd much prefer just being a lawyer and having my own caseload, because then I have total control over it. But I think God wants me to do more than that, to not just handle my cases, to try to influence others to do a good job and hold them accountable. I run that firm like boom, boom, boom. It's just, and I told her this is part of my problem because I have such high expectations for the lawyers that are under me. But I don't know how to not have that expectation when we're dealing with these lives, these very precious lives. So we need good foster homes, because sometimes these children they just come out in those foster homes. So someone might think that they're aware and they're open and I will foster these children, but then when they're faced with a child that's coming out as LGBTQ, they can't handle it. That's when all of our biases come into play. Sher talked about conversion therapy, and it has been outlawed in California. But laws are only as good as the people who make sure that they're effective. And so if Sher were a client of mine and she came and told me, you know, my counselor is still trying to convince me that, you know, I'm not gay, I'm not lesbian, there's someone still practicing a type of conversion therapy, and it's my job to step in. It's not good enough just to have the law on the books and for you and I as citizens to think, well, we've done our job, we voted that in, it's not good enough. You got to make sure that you're holding us accountable to make sure that the laws are in place and that we're holding people to those standards and those laws. So there's not enough people who understand and care, and even myself, you all, I'm not trying to put myself that I'm just so gay aware. I'm not. I have to keep learning. I have to keep, because I remember, for example, you like stories, I remember, for example, I had a group of 5 boy clients, 4 boys and a girl, African American, and they were going, and reunification was not going to happen. And so they were trying to find a place for all of those kids. And there was one home that would take them, at least one, and it was a gay male, 2 gay men. And I struggled with that, like, okay, not because they were gay and I thought they would be loving, but how are the children going to feel coming up in a home with gay men? What are they going to have to experience in the community, in school, because they have 2 fathers that are gay? So I struggled with that, and I looked at my own biases. What am I thinking? And it came down to, they're going to love those boys. And they did love those boys they loved those boys through probably things I can't even imagine. And they didn't come back and then say, you know what, I'm done, this isn't going to work. Not only did they take the 4 boys, they took the little sister. If it means that someone is gay and that's doing that, then I need to look at me if I'm going to say, I'd rather what, keep those kids all split up in different homes? Really? So we in the legal field have to look at our own biases all of the time. In terms of lawyers, I just want to share that right now some of the problems are not only finding good therapists, good foster homes, good lawyers, but some of our kids are going through either medical treatments or other type of surgical procedures. And those are even issues because if, for example, we're in reunification and the parent says, no, we can't just do it even if the child is old enough to consent to that and want that. So these things are a process. Us learning about our biases and putting them aside for what's best for children is a process. These procedures everything takes time. So that's one case where someone is the person who's wants to have some surgical procedure. The court can't move forward until we satisfy some other legal petitions that have to be in place, but they're in place. But lastly, I want to share with you a letter that I just got, and it was from a young person who, and I'll just say the name is John, and John wanted to petition me to keep a particular lawyer because the lawyer moved around to another courtroom, and John wanted me as the director to make sure that that lawyer still kept his case. Hello, Ms. Strickland. My name is John, and I've had an open case since I was a couple of months old. Up until I was 18 years old, Attorney Jennifer was my attorney, and even after that, she still looked over my case as the AB 12 supervisor. So now, by law, children can stay in care from 18 to 21 if they so choose and if they meet certain criteria. Because we used to just kick them out at 18 and say, good luck, hope we did a good job, which we usually didn't. After that, she still looked over my case as the AB 12 supervisor, and even that was very hard and even traumatic for me. I felt I was losing the only person other than my siblings who had been a part of my life every step of the way and fully encouraging me to be myself while also being a huge role model as I want a career in helping foster youth. And in October, I moved to a city to be a student assistant in an office. Attorney Jennifer showed me, even though it's rare to have someone on your caseload for so long, it's possible, and that also helped me feel that not everyone will give up on kids that may be hard to work with, and encouraged me to do the same. I will be turning 21 in March, and for me, this is a big step, and I feel Jennifer is the one to be able to really understand what this means to me. She had all the cases of my siblings, and she closed all of the cases for all of them, and since I am the baby, my case will be the case to finally have an ongoing closure in a few months. I feel the best way to explain it is Jen was, and in a way still is, my anchor in this crazy ocean we call the system. So if you can look into this and see if it's possible, I would really appreciate it. I apologize for the long email. I just want to make sure I'm clear of why this is, make sure you're clear why this is so important to me. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I cut out some of the stuff in the middle. But it is important that the right people are in place for these kids. Thank you.
Because this is really the best place to do it, we're just going to take about 5 or 10 minutes of any questions you might have for any of our panelists, and then we will adjourn, and you have your nice hot Italian meal. And we also have a microphone set up there, so as people are winding down their meal, if they have additional questions they'd like to ask, or if you'd like to come up and personally embrace and tell Sheer and Phyllis how wonderful they are, you could do that too. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Betty.
Well, there's at least two ways that most people come in and are licensed to foster care, either through the county, so San Bernardino County, LA County, whichever county, or through an FFA agency. It sounds like you all were going through an FFA agency. I'm not sure why it would take so long, but you definitely have to jump through some hoops, so people have to be committed to this process. You do have to come through some hoops. It's interesting and I think it's honest that you don't know what type of child you're going to get in your home. You've got to be in, you've got to be all in. And so you do want to do it at a time when it's good for you. We've got some friends at our church that they're both in the medical profession, and they just took in some children. Well, these by law now, the state, they're not supposed to tell you can get if you as a foster parent say, well, I only want black kids, or I only want Latinx kid, I don't want any gay kids. You can't do that anymore. You have to take who you can get, who they give you, because you don't want that discrimination up front. On the other hand, you do want people that are going to be able and willing to handle those issues. But my friends got 2 babies that are very medically fragile, and that's just, and they're all in. So I can talk to you more, but I think you're right about you want it to be the right time for your family, because it is going to take some effort.
Okay, one other question. We'll allow for more after people have gotten their food. Yes, ma'am. I know one organization you could hook up with, and then I'll let Phyllis add anything else she might know about. But we have had for a long time what's called the CASA program, which is a child advocates program. They have an office in Monterey Park in the Children's Courthouse. And these are mostly retired people or people who have time to give to the community who become a child advocate for a particular child. And that would be one way that you could, be very supportive and a mentor to a child. You might take them to a concert or something that, a lot of people have said, and it's true, that so many kids in South Central LA have never even been to the beach, which is really true. So there, and I have a very dear friend who is a little younger than I am, but she went through the foster care system and was in the system from age 5 to 18. An African-American friend had her speak at a conference. And all her siblings either committed suicide or ended up in drug addiction. And she did not. And the question was, what happened for her? Well, she was fortunate to get into a foster home where this woman had like a group of women, her friends, who always went to symphonies and to plays at the Chandler, the music center downtown. And so these ladies, she called them her 5 angels, always took her with them when they went to these things. And she could see that there was more life out there than this dreadful experience of having been taken into foster care when her mother, a drug addict, had left her, my friend, at age 5 in charge of her 4 siblings. They ran out of food. There was no food in the house whatsoever. And so she went just down to the corner store to get some milk. And while she was in the corner store, her little brother, who was 2, started a fire. And when she got back, their place had burned down. And that's when all the children went into the system. And I think she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and the brothers didn't do well at all. You know, I think that's another thing as well. But at any rate, there is the CASA program. Are you thinking of anything else?
Just big brother, big sister. And you maybe can designate, hey, I really want the more challenging, or I want this, or I want that. We often go to that resource.
A CASA would be great. Just go on the internet and put out Los Angeles County CASA program, CASA, all in caps. And they should be able to tell you.
We have one in San Bernardino County as well, if that's closer.
All right. Well, we have a wonderful lunch for you out there. And you don't have to. We appreciate having a $10 donation for this great food from what used to be Spaghetti Eddie's. There's a vegetarian dish for those of you who are vegetarian. There's also a gluten-free pasta. But pasta, bread, and salad await you out there, and some wonderful cookies. So enjoy, and we'll be out as well, and hopefully we can take a few more questions. So if you want let the tomato sauce marinate your brain a little bit more, that would be good. Thank you.
Yes. Now that's living.
That are coming into their home are LGBTQ kids. Can you answer that for us?
They oftentimes the social workers will give that information up front if they have it, to make sure that it's going to be a good match, because you don't want to move somebody into a home and then move them out immediately. So yes, that they can be told. But I don't think people understand the complexity of what they might be dealing with, and the type of care and comfort and support that they might have to give. That's the piece that might be missing.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there classes being offered that you know of in any of the counties to train foster parents on how to better parent such children?
The answer is yes. Two things. One, there's a new law that was passed about being family resource certified now. So even relatives that take in, if grandmother takes in grandchild, they have to go through the same type of classes, certification, and licensure to be a foster parent. So you have that licensure process, and then you have other classes, excuse me, that people can take to learn more. Yes.
Any other questions? The dependency court system is really something, and I actually was planning on spending my whole entire career there, like Judge Marilyn Martinez, who's now retired and was a very dear friend of mine and was Cher's judge. And she was so thankful that she had someone who was so caring and sensitive. My friend, the Berkeley grad. So very a wonderful judge. But you can imagine, one thing I wanted to mention to you, Phyllis brought up the point that not all judges at the children's court want to be there. I think the big bad secret that a lot of people don't know is that often dependency court ends up being a dumping ground for judges who aren't either performing the way they want, or they start them out there as their very first assignment, which I don't think should ever happen. But I know, having been in the system going back to 1991, that they would sometimes transfer judges to the dependency court to punish them because judges didn't want to go there. Yeah, it is awful, but you know, the reality was you had huge calendars, and you had to make huge decisions every day of the week. And I probably the most egregious part of it was just the volume of work. If you're going to be a good judge, you need to look through your files, you need to read the psychological profiles, you need to read all the papers in order to make a big decision. And I think the only way that I survived the system was my strong Christian faith. Because I realized my next door neighbor in dependency court was now is a man who's now deceased. But he said shortly after I got there, "This is God's work. Martha, this is God's work." And I was trying to find myself after leaving the ministry, and I thought of that many times. This is God's work. And so I am where I'm supposed to be. But every day that I left that courthouse, I knew I couldn't take all of these kids and their problems home with me all night, or I wouldn't sleep. So I used to pray every day on my way to my car. You know, God, I hope I've made the right decisions in the cases I've heard today, but I turn all these kids into your loving care until I see them again, because there's nothing more that you can do. And I was very involved as a jurist. I got involved in the statewide judicial teaching programs and so forth. But it is a hard assignment. And there's been more of an attempt in recent years to get judges who really do care to be in that system. But the reality is, you might appear in front of a judge who really knows nothing about social justice or sociology or psychology. You know, they were someone who was working as a civil litigator and had good connections to the governor, and woo, here I am in dependency court dealing with 50 abused and neglected kids, and they are the last people in the world that should be handling those cases.
And I'll add to that, dependency court was, or sometime may still be, considered kiddie court. And so the judges and even the lawyers don't feel like it has the same status as other courtrooms. So think about dealing with a, $50 million lawsuit that you have to judge and be over, or a criminal case that's all in the news. Those are the sexy cases. Dealing with children and families in foster care, that's not considered
sexy and alluring and like you need a bright mind, when in fact you really do. Because the law changes all the time, we get appellate opinions all of the time, so you really do need your best and your brightest, I believe, there. The current presiding judge has tried to change some of that image by A, opening more courtrooms so that the judges have fewer cases, B, having more judges come to that courthouse that are judges. We used to have referees, so someone could be a referee just by the presiding judge appointing that person to hear cases. And quite frankly, we had some good referees because they wanted to be there. And they were going through the trenches. They went through the trenches either as a lawyer or when they first got on the bench. But now the current presiding judge is trying to raise the bar, so to speak, by A, having more judges, each judge having fewer cases, and that everyone is a judge. But just because someone is a judge doesn't mean that this is the work that they want to do. Yes.
You spoke about there being aversion therapy being outlawed in California, but could you explain to me what that entails? What are they doing to the LGBT children when they do that? How does that work?
And Chair might obviously has firsthand information, but I think California was the first or the second state that outlawed conversion therapy, and now there's about 11 or 13. And basically, not enough states. Basically, they are trying, the therapist is there to convince, maybe convince isn't a word, persuade that, yes, you know what, you're really not gay, that's a choice, it's not something that you were born with, you're just buying into this, and your life would be better off if you were not. So it's not accepting the person as they are, and so the person is in a constant struggle. It's actually adding adverse consequences to children instead of helping, like a therapy should. And one moment, sir, I'll answer your question, but I want Chair to speak to this.
Everything that you said is completely accurate. The sessions in particular, sure, sorry. The sessions in particular are very routine. They're very, it feels very cold, very strict, very sheltered almost, almost as if you're put up against a wall. If you've ever felt like your back is pushed up against the wall, that is the feeling that you live with on a weekly basis. And to extend that a bit more, I didn't just endure conversion therapy weekly with a therapist, I also endured conversion therapy at church as well. So I met regularly with my church pastor, regularly about my gender identity and my gender expression, how I chose to express myself, and that looks quite, that's quite different. Your read Bible passages, you know them back from back to front and from front to back, and you listen to the pastor, in particular in my case, call me out in front of the church congregation as a young child, specifically when Prop 8 was happening here in California. I felt very targeted. I think the entire sermon was about our sessions, actually. But that's conversion therapy for you. That's literally conversion therapy. It's confusing. It's not structured. It's very. It's just hypocritical. It's just hypocritical, and it's so harmful. It's just so harmful.
And I was thinking too, if we're talking about this, especially in the church, if we're talking about a God of love, how confusing that may that God loves everybody but you. Everybody here is forgiven for all of their sins, no matter what they were, but not yours. That's incongruent to have a God like that. Makes no sense.
Yes, hello. Is this much better? I should do this more often. I should go on a tour. I should do some sort of talk. But I think that when we all come together to support one another, I think that is the hand of God. When we're all together in fellowship like we are now, with our hearts open, with our minds open, with our ears open, with a commitment to creating change, to making a difference in someone's life, that is the hand of God. So if you took anything away from today, I would just ask that you move forward with a commitment to make a difference in a young person's life, specifically an LGBTQ young person who's in foster care.
And I was just going to, we'll get to you. I was just going to, make a funny. It's not funny, but when we soon have President Pence, you'll find out what conversion therapy is all about, because he supported it and supports it. He was the governor of Indiana, and he wanted to tie a lot of different funds and things to conversion therapy. I just need to tell you this one story. Many of you know that I was affiliated for a number of years with Claremont UCC, United Church of Christ, and helped found and direct Another Voice, their gay fellowship. And we had a young man in our fellowship who actually was a medical doctor. He was gay, and his parents were Pentecostal, Assembly of God, and they were just mortified that this son was gay. So they told him, we want to send you to, he was in his 20s at this time, we want to send you to some conversion therapy. So they sent him to this man who was supposedly known within the church as being really effective at conversion therapy and so forth. And before the end of this session was over with this doctor, he came on to this man. So, a lot of the people who protest too much have a lot of issues that they need to resolve themselves. That's all I can say. People who are really clear and settled about their sexual orientation and gender, and they're comfortable with it, they don't have a problem with us. They really don't. They really don't. So that's what I was going to tell you about President Pence. No, I can't stand that angelic little smile he makes every time he's sitting behind Donald. Reminds me of Nancy Reagan. Anyway. These things just pop in my mind. I'm sorry. Forgive me, Lord. Someone asked me to make sure that and I know there's still questions back there, tell you how to donate to the Linda Vogel Scholarship Fund. All you need to do is write a check to Claremont United Methodist Church, and down on the note line, write Linda Vogel Scholarship Fund, and it'll go right into that account. We have a separate account. As it stands now, we have $3,800 in it. So do we have a specific goal? Well, the more we can get, the better, and I think that this pitch needs to be made annually, because as long as we can, we want to encourage the support of LGBTQ kids, and maybe not just 1 year. For example, if we were going to give even a $250 scholarship a year to a person, we might want to commit for 4 years if they stayed in school, or 2 years, or whatever. So we have all of that as a subcommittee to sit down and ferret out, and yours truly is on the subcommittee, so we'll get that all figured out. But that's how you contribute. Okay. I saw a hand down there.
Yeah, in your agency, once a decision is made, how is there an appeal process? Describe the appeal process.
Okay, I can tell you something about that, because I was appealed.
Okay.
And fortunately, the Court of Appeals stood by me. But what happens is, if the appeal comes when a child is taken away from their parent, okay, and placed somewhere else, at that point in time, it's called disposition. And at that point, the parents can file an appeal. There's a whole system of delinquency. You have a trial. It's a lot like criminal court in some of its phases. There's an arraignment of the parents. There's a trial called an adjudication. And then there's the disposition, the decision of the judge what to do with these kids. Am I going to remove them from home, or send them into foster care. So at that point, they can appeal. They have 60 days from the date of the disposition decision to appeal to the Court of Appeals. And in LA, it would be the 2nd District Court of Appeals. And we, as Phyllis is correct, particularly in recent years, we've had more and more cases coming down every year in this whole area of the law. So it's not an area of the law to get into unless you really want to read your advance sheets are on the internet now. I guess keep track of the Court of Appeals and what they're saying. So that's how they go about appealing it, is to the Court of Appeals after the judge has made a decision to remove the children from them. Any other questions? And that is, you know, there's a whole lot more I used to lecture on the dependency system, and as Phyllis knows, having taken my course, I handed out a sheet showing all the different hearings that you have and everything, and it's been a while since I've done it, so I know things have changed tremendously, but they're still basically the same structure. If I didn't have to commute, I'd sign up for the assigned judges program and ask them to send me to Monterey Park. Any other questions? Yes.
I taught high school for a long time, and most of the kids that signed up for my class was an art class. Most of the kids were billed as troubled kids. They dressed like, you know, the goth system. This was back in the old days, you know, where they, well, anyway, there was a whole bunch of kids that were extricated from the rest of the kids. And I'm sure, I said this to Shane, but it's so helpful to have her say, this is what high school is. I mean, there's a lot of good kids in high school, but there's a lot of stuff that happens that I don't know about, and I need to find out about stuff like that. You know, just things that happen, and you don't know the kids that are labeled incorrigible or problematic generally aren't. Generally, they're good kids that do what you say. They're just, damn it, they're adolescents. They just mess up. So, I don't know. I just wanted to say that.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How do you be an advocate for yourself? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Robin, and I just wanted to share about my experience in getting a new job. I went for 3 interviews to be a chaplain at Hillsides, and at the second interview there was a rainbow flag up. And I am working at a home for children, which hasn't always been this way, but which has a deep commitment to being very supportive and creating a culture among the youth there of support for gay, lesbian, transgender, queer folks. And we have 2 transgender youth there now. I don't know how many gay and lesbian at all, but I know that the culture is very supportive, and I'm so grateful to be there, and I'm so grateful to have been here today to know that there is change, and that there is a community that can be created that includes the whole community as support, in loving and attentive listening and caring for people who are facing adolescence with, you know, a certain amount of childhood trauma, and that they can live together in peace about this issue, for the most part. I mean, it's not easy. A lot of the kids are young, and new kids come in every day and need to kind of be educated into the way the culture is. and find acceptance with that. But it's a wonderful, wonderful place for these children. Thank you.
Well, two quick comments on just what had been said. We all remember our high school days, don't we? And some of them, even for those of us who had intact families and tried to be all-American, whatever that may be. I guess our president knows what that is. The rest of us don't. But at any rate, we all had things said to us by peers and people, and sometimes teachers, that made a tremendous impact, and we still hold to this day. Maybe we can't forget what we had for breakfast, but we remember what our social studies teacher told us, that you're so stupid, no college will ever accept you. Or things like that do happen, and kids are very cruel to other kids, and we experience that, but then multiply that about 100 times for LGBTQ kids who are trying to live their authenticity. It breaks my heart to know and hear again Cher's story about getting hurt so badly that they damaged her back permanently by attacking her and so forth. But anyway, that's a tough time, and kids, say terrible things, and now with social media, there's no stopping it. I mean, even straight kids are committing suicide because, girls in particular, because terrible things are said about them that aren't true most often, and sent all around, and it gets to the point they don't want to go to school. So I don't know how we get control of all of that, but we've got to learn something about civility and manners and whatever. Yes, quickly, yeah.
Quickly. Like was said about judges that are sent to certain places because that's a punishment. Just remember that there are a lot of schools where educators are sent to the hardest places as punishment. The biggest classes, the ones that have the most trouble, the fights are always serious. That's where some of the young teachers are sent as punishment for being young teachers. And we don't know about bureaucracies anymore, because it's bureaucracies, well.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for... Was there another question down there? Yes.
Yeah, just real quick. When the foster care children age out of the system, now you're saying 21, where do they go? Are there places for them to go?
Well, they spend I'll let Phyllis and Cher talk to you, but I know that they spend a lot of time as the kid approaches 18 through, if they choose to continue their affiliation till 21, gathering together resources for them. I spent a lot of time working in the delinquency system, and we had the same thing, only the sad thing is a lot of the kids in the delinquency system had been in the dependency system. And why were they in the delinquency system? Because they didn't care, they acted out, they got in the delinquency system. But the probation department began to put together a bunch of resources for like transitional living situations, and I assume that same thing is going on with dependency.
Yes, that's correct. So to start at the end, a lot of the kids, when they age out of the system, they go back home where they came from. Because where else are they going to go unless they're going to be homeless? And that's why it's important to repair those homes to whatever level you can if possible, so that that family system, maybe it's auntie, there's one aunt or one uncle or one godparent who can still be supportive to that child. So some kids go back home, hopefully they're going through some type of college, or they've, because they can get they can still get funding to go through college up to 21. And then then other kids, just different things. Either they can stand on their own 2 feet. Some children we see back in foster care, but now they're a parent, and they have their own children that have been taken. Because again, we as a foster care system are not good at parenting children. So it's a mixed bag. Did you want to say anything to that?
Thank you. And this is actually going to be, I just want to say my phone has been going off, and I'm so sorry. It's interesting. I have a flip phone. I also have an iPhone, but I have a flip phone. And I can't figure out how to turn the setting on. Isn't that so interesting? I can't figure out. I use my iPhone for like emails and whatnot and stuff, and I use my flip phone for like regular calls and stuff. So sorry. But what were we talking about? Because that's all I was focused on. I was so embarrassed. Oh yes, and I think there's too few. There's not enough. There's not enough, and I think. The reality is that for many LGBTQ young people, and please take a look at the yellow sheet that was provided with statistics, because homelessness is a guaranteed bet for LGBTQ young people, for all young people in the foster care system. Exiting after you're no longer able to receive services, homelessness is what you're looking at. So I think there's too few services, but that's what I would say. And with that, I want to say thank you. I'm going to leave just a little early because I'm going to be meeting with a friend at Claremont who I haven't seen in a long time because they're here at school, and I live all the way up north in the county, North County in Lancaster. So it's been an honor to be here. I want you all to know. Thank you so much for welcoming me.
Thank you again for your support of this program. I really appreciate it. I am just delighted with the speakers today. Phyllis, our lives were meant to be entwined in the way that they have been, and the teacher becomes the teacher and the marvelous lawyer, and you should apply to the bench. And share, there couldn't be a better spokesperson for the transgender and lesbian gay family than you. So God bless you and have a wonderful life. Thank you all. Yes.
You know, mine's not a question. I'm sure. Mine's not a question, but I do teach high school and I have seniors. And I've noticed with the what's been happening with my students who are in the foster system, and I have several, that they're getting pulled out and they're coming back and they're all dressed up in suit and ties, and I'm like, hey, what happened? Why were you gone for 40 minutes? And we're practicing interviews. We're practicing. So they're getting an extra service, at least that I know at our school, and I think it's fantastic. I think it's awesome that they're being provided this opportunity where they are actually getting taught the skills and also getting taught budgeting skills and things that are not normally taught in the high school. So just want some of you to know what's going on.
Thank you all very much.